Linda Southward, and I have the honor of directing the Children's Foundation of Mississippi. Today, we're extremely pleased to host Senator Brice Wiggins on our Chat About Children today. He clearly is one of the strongest advocates for children in early education programs on behalf of Mississippi's children. And one of the things that we believe at the Children's Foundation is for Mississippi to succeed, Mississippi's children need to succeed. So, Senator Wiggins, welcome.
Welcome. Glad I could be here, and thank you for having me, most definitely.
Well, sure. I think it's important for people to know a little bit more about the person besides the person's name that they see at the Capitol. Obviously, you are a public servant and have been a public servant for many years in addition to your law practice. So if I might, I'd just like to say a few words about you. We know that you have long ties to the Gulf Coast, particularly in Pascagoula in Jackson County. You attended public schools, graduating from the high school, Pascagoula High School there, and then of course went on and got your law degree. Some people might not know, and I learned this recently as well, that public service has been a hallmark of your life within your family, with your grandfather once serving as a mayor of Pascagoula, I believe. Great-grandfather back in the 50s. So
that's right.
It sounds like it's really been in your sort of DNA, if you will, as public service, et cetera. I was just on a Zoom call with some other people before this call, and I said that I was going to have the opportunity to talk with you on the chat about pre-K. And they said, well, do you also know that he's been a strong advocate for the children's advocacy centers around the state? And I said, I did not know that, but I will mention that in the chat. And they were very, very high on your work there. But we know that you also been chair of the Senate Medicaid Committee, the first one that was appointed, I believe, and you've served on many other roles and on various roles within the legislature, from appropriations to vice chair of the Senate Education and Senate Public Health Committees and other things. So again, thank you for your service. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Linda. And I'm not paying you, but you can go out and be my spokesperson from now on if you want to.
Well,
you did such a good job.
Thank you. Well, we support, we really want to use this opportunity to be able to spotlight positive things that are going on in our state. And one of the best investments, as you well know, and one of the highest returns on investment is investing in children and investing in children their first 1,000 days of life and their first 5 years of life. So we know that you've been the lead author on a couple of transformational pieces of legislation. And the one we're really going to talk about, well, we've talked about Criminal Justice Reform Act, which has been very important. But today we're really going to focus on the 2013 Early Learning Collaborative Act that established Mississippi's first ever early education program. And so would you give us a little background of that piece of legislation? And then we're going to talk about what has happened just in this past legislative session.
Yeah, thank you. So I do think and setting my own personal pride and bias aside, I do think when history will be kind to it, and already in a few short years, it's turning out to be one of the best things that certainly the legislature has done and the state of Mississippi has done. And so just to give some background, and before I go into that, just to kind of tell you, children and the early learning has been a part of me. Before I entered the Senate, I was a prosecutor in the DA's office. And, you know, at a certain point, I got tired of putting children to prison. And that's what I was doing. And I got started in early education. Of course, when I was in the DA's office, I had little kids. And then there was a program called Excel by Five that was started locally and now is in the state. And it worked on a collaborative model. And so, and then through that, I learned, about the developments in brain research
Yes.
that's really happened. I think you and I, Linda, have talked about that back then, even about what the brain research has showed in, the last 20 years. And I think that's having a humongous effect on public policy in a good way. And so when I understood about the brain research and I understood where we were going, and I got tired of putting children in prison, I said there had to be a way that we could do better. And, I kind of gravitated to the early education because of all of this. And so when I got elected, that was one of my goals. I took office for the first time in 2012, and taking what we had done locally, and I wanted to replicate that statewide. And at the time, Mississippi was one of only 9 or 10 states to not have public backing of a early education program. And and when I got elected, I said, I'm tired of being last, and I wanted to do something about it. And that's an evidence of something we were last in. Okay, so I started doing that, and then really in, I guess it was 2013. I got together with Mississippi First, Rachel Cantor and Mississippi First. But how we came together was that first year I was on the Senate, and I have been, and I was then on the Senate Education Committee. And as she tells it, she heard me make an amendment and to add pre-K or pre early learning to a bill. And she said, "Who's this?" And so we got together, and then when I found out what they did, and I think Mississippi First was fairly new at that time, and she said, "Look, I've got this, and the collaborative model has been done in a couple other states, like Oklahoma was the one, and they had done a white paper. A white paper is one that talks about a policy paper on that. So when I read it, I was like, hey, this is what we've been trying to do on a local level, and can we take it and adapt it?" And so we talked about that, and then in 2012 or 2013, I'm sorry, we had kind of been in the ear of the Senate Education Chairman at that time, which was Gray Tollison from Oxford, and had told him about it, and he was a supporter. And so he he knew it, and I think before I go on, let me say this, and I think y'all understand this, that when before we did this, the early education community was like to live in silos. Okay, and I'm willing to say that because it's a fact. And so part of the reason is, well, why wasn't it done before? Well, it wasn't done before because everybody wanted to protect their turf, to be quite honest. And so that had been the case in different formats, and it hadn't. So there'd been efforts, but it never made it through. Okay,
It's
so
true. Working together is better for children.
yeah, but imagine that in Mississippi and in politics, people don't want to do that. They just, they don't want to do it, or they've not been shown the way, or whatever it is. And so in the study, let me say this: the studies that Mississippi First and Rachel Cantor had showed that it's a collaborative model that is what makes early learning a success. The collaborative format. Okay, so in 2013, Chairman Thompson said, "Yeah, let's go ahead and y'all try to come up with something." And at the time, Mississippi was doing in the legislature, we were doing other reforms. We were doing third grade reading aid. We were doing public charter schools. We were doing consolidation. So it became part of this reform kind of big package, and that was a good thing. And so in some ways, it was kind of nice to be under the radar, which we were. And I think if you talk to Mississippi First, they'll admit that, and Rachel will admit that. So we were under the radar, and we were able to draft the bill using the white paper, but also what Oklahoma did, and also using my experience and what we did. And so but the key to it, and I did not know this, this is where I was introduced to it, was by Mississippi First, and that was the National Institute of Early Education Research, which, as I came to learn, and I've called it the good housekeeping seal of approval in early education. And as I was informed through this white paper that they have their benchmarks that have been, studied, and their benchmarks are curriculum based, or they're evidence based. And so it was my idea that we write this into the statute, their benchmarks. And because those things are what the data and the studies have shown leads to high quality. And we can talk about some of the studies that had led up to that, but the key was high quality. And so NEAR's benchmarks were all about high quality. Okay, so we wrote it into the legislation. And also where things was, look, we were and we still are, but we're in a conservative legislature. We are in a Republican supermajority legislature, and there are just policies and policy ideas that either have a hard time, or they are ones that need to be addressed in a conservative manner. Okay, and so at that time, early education was not thought of as a conservative policy. And so that was something we were going to have to overcome. So that actually, in my mind, forced us to create a program that what I've come to call a conservative approach to early education. It's a bottom-up approach. And instead of Jackson telling everybody what to do and passing mandates, what we said is we're going to have benchmarks, and it's going to be a bottom-up approach. Okay, so that was key. But also from my experience, having worked in through Excel by 5 and other things, what we found was that daycare centers and early education areas were really struggling to keep quality teachers. Okay, and it was becoming, just a place for in different areas, just a place to babysit rather than learn. But like in my area, you have people that they had to go to work. In order to go to their job, they had to have childcare. Okay, so all of this kind of came together that led to the Early Learning Collaborative bill. And then being Republicans, one of the things that speaks to Republicans is tax incentives. And so one of the things that we put into the bill was a tax credit. And when we started out, what we knew was that it needed to be a public-private partnership. And the reality is that Mississippi has a lot of needs, and we need help from the private sector. And so the whole idea was it being a public-private partnership. And so this tax credit allowed for private entities or private individuals or private groups to donate and get a 1-for-1 tax credit to a collaborative that gets set up. And so then if they donate, the collaboratives can use the money to help them, and it gets matched by the state. And what we said through the bill was, look, we know that we want to support early education. We said, but if we will help you, but you gotta meet the high standards that we're putting in this bill. So you don't have, and we made it voluntary. You don't have to be a part of it, but we will help you, and we will help you with money, but you have to be part of the high quality nature, because we knew in the study and the data has shown that it's high quality that makes it different, that gets you the return on investment. So, so I'm kind of going off on the tangents here, but that came about, and then we had to get it through the legislature, and it became a bipartisan approach, and to getting it and working with and convincing, and I say convincing because not everybody was on board at the time, but Lieutenant Governor Reeves heard us and he said, let's go for it. And so we pushed it through, and it was great. And so since that time, it's really taken off, but it's taken off like we designed it, which was kind of slow growth. Let's be smart about it. Let's be accountable to it. And then if we need to tweak it, we will. So that's kind of how it got started.
Well, thank you for that history there. And we also know that there's been several surveys that have been done over a 10-year period, random surveys of Mississippians. And by and large, over 80% of Mississippians have been supportive of pre-K over a 10
Yeah.
period. And
I'm
we
sorry.
go ahead.
Let me say, I'm sorry, Linda. Let me say that. And that's one of the things that we knew. The Mississippi Economic Council, before we had done it, had actually done surveys and had done it. And that's what the data showed, that 75 to 80% supported this. And so we knew, and that was one of the things that we used to talk to the state, the lieutenant governor and the speaker of the House, and said, look, this is supported by our folks and it's supported by Republicans. So it's supported by all across the board. And, that allowed us to get it started.
And I think that's where maybe some of our first conversations happened when I was at the Social Science Research Center at Mississippi State before I
Right.
retired, and came with the Children's Foundation. And so we also know from some of those surveys that 95% of Mississippians are supportive of quality childcare. And we know like 94 or 95% are supportive um, of having wellness checks and having developmental screening and that sort of thing. And so when you talked about NEARS, screening, referral, and support services are part of those 10 areas, in addition to teacher degrees and the maximum class size and the staff child ratio, all the things that you know, and then the in-service and teachers degrees and assistant teachers. So all of those coming together to support the early learning standards that are connected with the Mississippi Department of Education. So the evidence has also been clear that, as you know, children who have attended pre-K in Mississippi, their kindergarten readiness scores are at the top as well. And so this year, as I understand, and I want to make sure that we have the correct numbers here, the legislature doubled the amount of funding for pre-K from $8 million to $16 million. And so that's quite an increase in Mississippi. And we know that that's going to cover many more children. Currently, about 9 or 10% of all 4-year-olds in Mississippi have slots for pre-K. And of course, this will increase it substantially. I think maybe about 2,500 more children. So what else can be done to continue this going forward?
Well, so it's interesting about how that came to be.
I hope I got the
Uh,
numbers right.
no, you did, but we started out with 3 million when we first did it. So it
Right.
went from 3 million to 6 million to 8 million to 16 million. And we knew, look, the way the legislature operates, we have a lot of needs and not enough money. And so you have to be smart with the money. And the way education funding occurs is, many people know about MAEP. Well, this wasn't a MAEP based program. So we came about, first of all, in the numbers, let me say this, uh, that there's a reason for those numbers. And actually, I credit, again, Mississippi First for helping me understand that. And that is that there's the data says that to properly educate and get your return in pre-K, it's around $4,500 per child. Okay. And that can add up and be expensive. All right. So when we set out the legislation, we started with that each child we wanted to serve was to have 4,500, it's to be $4,500 for that. And then and also at the time, working with my colleague in the House, Toby Barker, who's now the mayor of Hattiesburg, there was some money that we knew was there. And so what we said was, hey, let's base it on that. Let's try to get that. We did a little less than 4,500, and we think we can get the 3 million and do that. And so that's what happened. And so we set it out that to have a quality early education program, you have to have around $4,500 per child. And so when we did the 3 million, it served a small few. So the idea was, okay, let's ramp it up. Let's see how it's going. And then let's prove to the legislature that it's working. And that's what we've been able to do. And we wrote into the legislation accountability measures, such as a peer report and such as other things that we needed to do, that we could say, look, it's working. Let's be accountable. And so that's what's happened, is that we've been able to say, look, the returns are showing that it's working. And to your point about the kindergarten readiness scores, yes, that's been the case. And actually, the data is showing that the children who've been in the collaboratives are scoring higher than the ones who are not on the kindergarten readiness standards. And so with that as background, the legislature has been willing to increase the funding. And so we went from 3 to 6 million. And then, depending on how the revenue's going, it gets even better. And so then this year we went from 8 to 16 million. And a lot of that is attributed, that increase is from Chairman DeBar and Senate Education Chairman DeBar, and from Lieutenant Governor Hoseman has supported it. And so we were able to put that money into the collaboratives. And let me remind folks that when we, in the 2018 special session, we of course authorized the lottery. And so the lottery, as it was set out, said when it gets above 80 million, that any additional money is going to go into education, and particularly early education. So what's happened, this has been the first full year of the lottery, it's exceeded 80 million. Well, we were able to take money and put that in there, and I think that's going to continue to be the case. So it's a combination, in my opinion, of thinking forward, thinking outside the box, having people see what's going on, and then the legislature recognizing that, hey, this is a benefit and the return on investment for our children is huge. And so that led us to be able to increase it to 16 million this year.
And that is, last year, I understand that there was a raise the rate, so that was done during the 2021 session, and then that has continued on with the current session, right? So that the amount of money that's needed per child has been increased, and it will be maintained.
Yeah, the rate is what I was talking about the per
Right.
child. And we had to work with what we had, and we know the $4,500. So the collaboratives were actually kind of, if you will, sharing more than what we set out for it to be. And so by the state raising the rate, the state is taking on what was really its share of it in the first place. And so, and maybe I wasn't as clear earlier, but through the collaborative, what we're saying is, if you have a collaborative, the state's going to match your collaborative 1 by 1, or 1 to 1. So, you get double the amount of funds in there from the state. And we've also have capped that number about who can get there, and we can talk about that if you want to. But as far as the rate, yes, we increased that last year. We continued that this year, which means the state is standing by what it said earlier. And that means that the 4-year-old is getting the highest quality education in early education. And we've been recognized. I should have said this a lot earlier. We've been recognized nationally. We are literally top 5 in the country in early education. And when we started seeing this, I said, when did you ever think that Mississippi would be number 1 or top 5 in the country in education? And nobody ever thought that. And
Well,
we are, based on quality measures, based on serving of the children, and the data is proving it.
and that's what I wanted to point out to make sure. So you did say it earlier, but I wanted to reinforce that that amount of raise the rate was passed in 2020 and it's being maintained now going forward because that's part of the investment and to have more positive outcomes. And yes, I have heard that we are top 5, top 4. The other states I think are Rhode Island, Michigan, and then we have 2 deep South sister states, Alabama and Mississippi. And as you know, Senator, well, I don't think many of us have traveled much the last year, but as we have traveled and certainly Zooming in between times, sometimes there's just not the expectation of folks across the country on what Mississippi is doing or what Mississippi can be doing. And I think the investment in pre-K, the fact that it was doubled this year, the fact that we're in the top 4 across the country, I understand the new ratings are going to be coming out within the next a couple of weeks or so, and I'm very optimistic that we'll be able to continue that. Certainly are hoping so here. Um, so let me see. The tax credits, I have understood, I got some information from the Mississippi Department of Education earlier this week. And in 2014, the tax credit was $276,580. And that has steadily gone up every year. And if I'm seeing this, that it's 5.5 million in 2020 was the total amount. So for individuals within their own community, and you mentioned this earlier, to be able to invest. I know with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation report that came out in February of last year, Mississippi was one of 4 states that was highlighted in that particular report. And just to swing back to what you said earlier, one of the things you said, the importance, I think certainly during COVID, as we're continuing through the pandemic, it really has heightened the importance of quality early care and education because the parents are needing to work and the parents need quality early care and education. And it's like the workforce of today of tomorrow is dependent upon the early care and education workforce that's being developed today. So would you speak a little about that on how you once again see this as sort of an economic development issue?
Oh, well, it's most definitely that, but it's also more than that. As you were kind of explaining that, I was sitting here thinking that we're talking a lot about kind of the ins and outs of the legislature and all. I don't want it to be lost that this is really about the children. Okay. And, us policymakers and all, we can get lost in the weeds and stuff. This is about the children. This is about giving our children a future, a bright future, and a future that they can know that they're going to be able to compete with folks all across the country. And you start early, and the brain research, as you know, has said that. That's why I said when we were first starting to do this, it's a better use of taxpayer funds putting it on the front end than it is on the back end, to be quite honest, because you're getting more bang for your buck. But back to the children, it's about the children, and we owe it to our children to do that. And yes, nowadays you have two working parent families, you have single parents that have to work, and childcare is expensive. Look, my wife and I are professionals, and it was expensive for us, and we had 2 kids.
Mhm.
and it's something that has, that we need to be aware of. And one of the successes or secret of the success of the collaborative is that private child care centers and parochial child care centers can participate in the program. And so most of your children of working parents or wherever are at a private child care center, a church-based child care center, or something like that. And so they can participate.
As well as
And
Head Start slots.
yeah, oh yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, as well as Head Start. And that was one of the keys. We said, look, Head Start has to be a part of this program. So it's about the children, and it's about laying that foundation. And from an economic development standpoint, people in businesses in Mississippi, they want, they need a workforce. And I don't want to minimize, folks and things like that, but they need a workforce. And that's I got Chevron in my district, and they recruit nationally. We have Toyota statewide who's been a supporter of this, because we support our own, and they would much rather hire Mississippians. Okay, so they're looking long term. This is about long term, but it gives our Mississippians, but our children, this foundation that we can compete for the future of the jobs that are coming, the jobs that are there, things like that. So, but I wanted to add to this point, which was, I mentioned that I got started in the DA's office looking at this. We had law enforcement supporting what we were doing, because what they see is that if you have this foundation of education and you started, that reduces crime at the back end. And I've told the story about the last trial I did before I left the DA's office was putting a 14-year-old in prison for murder or attempted murder. And, it tears at you that that's what is going on. And look, most of the cases that you see of kids, and I call them kids, in the criminal system, education is either not a priority, they haven't had that. And if you can get them early with high quality education, then then crime is lessened at the back end. And that's what I saw happening. So education can do a lot, and that's why we wanted to start early.
Well, thank you so much. And I just to reinforce that point, to thinking about as you centered us back, and this is a chat about children, and it is the Children's Foundation of Mississippi, to think about children all across the state, because we know on average about 100 babies are born every day in Mississippi. So when we take a look at around 37,000, depending on which year, 38,000 4-year-olds in Mississippi, and with this recent legislation, it's going to go probably to serve maybe close to 6,000 children, which is such an improvement over the percentage of what it has been. And thinking about growing this slowly, are very intentionally, I think might be a better choice of words there. And then we can't help but think about children who are outside of quality programs, and to think about how we can get quality across the state, I think is important for all children, for their brain development, for each child to have the supports that they need, and to have the best possible outcomes. So I just wanted to say thank you for your work. Thank you for the legislature who has doubled this amount of support, and understanding how we can really work together to bring more entities together, and hopefully more resources in the future. I know you're maybe thinking, oh, the legislative session has just ended and now we're thinking about additional. We're really thinking about, as you said, what's in the best interest of children. And so this is just such a bright spot of the session, and something that I'm not sure that everyone had anticipated that it would happen to this amount. Um, so is there anything else that we haven't talked about today that you would like the audience to know, or how they can get more engaged in this process?
Well, I would just say, talk to your legislators and tell them what a success it's been. And I will say, look, when we first launched off into this, there were skeptics and didn't think it would work or didn't believe in the policy. But the reason it has continued to have a very good upward trajectory is because legislators have heard from their communities, and particularly those with collaboratives, how it's working and what it does. And I kind of get chills because that's actually how our government is supposed to work. You know, as legislators, we're supposed to listen to our constituents, and something that is, and particularly about something that benefits our children. And I would say just talk to your legislators and tell them what a great program it is, but what a great start for our children on that is. And also, just to continue to get people involved, supporting this and rallying around it, if you will, because it's not often that Mississippi's leading the country, or certainly not in the top five, and it's something that we ought to be proud of and pushing forward. And let me add this. You know, I see it, and others I think have seen it, that starting here, if your children are performing better through pre-K, it only makes the job for teachers easier when they get to elementary school, and then it makes it easier at that. So as you get later, and so it's about making the job for our teachers easier, because I certainly heard from teachers that said, you know, I wish they were more prepared for kindergarten, or more or ready, because the world's not gonna stop. And so it's helping our teachers to do that, to prepare them. And so just to stay positive about it and continue to spread the word.
Well, and that was part of the reason that we wanted you on the chat today, to lift this up and to celebrate the success of this session for children in Mississippi as far as pre-K collaborative. So once again, thank you, Senator Wiggins, for your leadership. And we hope to have you on other chats going forward with more times of celebration.
I would love it, and thank you for what y'all have done. And look, there's y'all are responsible too. I should name y'all. I should name you two, Linda, and I should name. There's a whole bunch of people, Cindy, and everybody, because it's not just me, excuse me, or individual legislators. It's everybody. But guess what? That's what happens when you work together, and you put who cares about credit behind.
Exactly, exactly. And as we said at the beginning, and one of the real mantras of the Children's Foundation is for Mississippi to improve. We must make sure that there's opportunities for our children to get what they need. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.